Hi, I'm Noel. This is Antonia from Boxtail Soup Theatre Company. This is, of course, a Boxtail Scoop. I had a false start then. And first of all, of course, as ever, thank you very much for watching. If you're enjoying these videos, maybe give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, or possibly even subscribe. That would be lovely.
Yes, we are going to talk this week about being your own boss. Basically, we've had a week of admin and it occurred to us that there are various challenges, obviously, when you are your own boss. And I had a conversation with a friend yesterday to do with all of that and kind of the kind of things that we've done to help overcome some of those challenges. So if you're not really interested in that slightly more businessy side of things, then don't worry, we are going to be back with our usual making type vlog next week. We're going to be getting back to making on Hansel and Gretel, so we should have some things to show you. So you could just skip this week and look forward to next week if this is not your bag.
We've actually got notes this week
notes
as well, because we thought this is easily the kind of thing that we could end up rambling and waffling about without having kind of much focus. So what we thought we'd do is write down a few of the key things that we were thinking about, and we can be a bit more organised in how we deliver it.
We're going to try anyway.
Well,
we'll try our best. So we wrote down a list of difficulties and challenges that we've certainly encountered through being our own bosses. So we're going to read those out to you, as it were, first. The first one we wrote down is that your work-life balance is entirely in your own hands. You've not got anyone else deciding when you work and when you stop and all that sort of thing. Second one we wrote down is no one is setting you deadlines or checking up on your progress. The third thing we wrote down is space. Potentially you have no dedicated work space. Fourth thing we wrote down is time. There is no clear designated working day that has been prescribed to you by your employer. Fifth thing we wrote down is imposter syndrome. Nobody has employed you, nobody has given you this job. You are the one who's decided you should and can do the job. And therefore, you may well suffer from imposter syndrome. We certainly have on numerous occasions. 6, our last one really, is self-promotion. Having to sell yourself and your products, whatever that might be. We definitely still struggle with this one.
And then we said very briefly at the end, we might touch on the fact also that we work as a couple. So that whether the particular challenges of working with your partner or with someone that you're very close to in that way.
So we then thought we'd go back over the list and say what we've done, what the kind of things we've tried and sometimes failed with, but...
Yeah, we're just going to work our way through them and explain how we've tackled them as we've gone along. Really.
Exactly. So going back to number 1 then, the work-life balance being in your hands.
As I said when we were discussing the idea for this vlog, I think that for me, that comes back to that idea, that quote about, there's a famous quote that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And then there are several versions of that being twisted into a bit of a joke to say, if you love what you do, you'll end up working 18 hours days, underpaid, and nobody will ever thank you for it, and so on and so on. And I think that there is an element of truth to that, because if you want what you're doing to succeed and you enjoy it, then of course you're going to want to put that time in, you're going to put all the effort in, and it can be really, really difficult because no one's telling you, it can be really difficult to know when to stop and to feel like, okay, I've done enough work for today, I need to rest, and to actually value that time off as well.
There's also a huge element, I think, of, certainly for me, I feel guilty if I'm not working. I feel like I should be doing more. I always feel like I'm not quite doing enough. And I think that finding a balance with that is tricky, because you're so responsible. You are completely and entirely responsible for your work life. And if it's something that you love as well and that you really believe in, then that responsibility can weigh quite heavily and make you feel guilty if you're not constantly thinking about what the next thing might be or whatever. So we have found that a very basic way to help with this is to keep a very strict calendar and schedule days off. And that sounds really basic and really obvious, but it's actually quite difficult to do, especially the scheduling days off part. Because so often what will happen, and certainly what happened to us very much in the early stages when we were having to work other jobs as well as start the company, it's very difficult. Your days off at that stage really are working on that's when you work on the company, is during your time off.
Yes.
It's not until you've got to the point which we have in the last few years where we exclusively work for our own company that we can actually then say our days off can actually be days off.
Sure.
And even if it's just one day a week, then do keep it. We try and keep at least one day as sacred. Yeah. It's usually a Sunday, depending on if we're touring. Sometimes it's not Sundays and it might be a Monday, but try and keep one day that is just for yourself, because otherwise you will just burn out and you'll find that you are less productive, I think.
Yeah, I think you're less productive. You get grumpy with each other as well, because you're sort of fed up basically because you're working all the time. And I think that the tricky part about the day off thing is that other people don't necessarily respect that either. And what I mean is that because you're not working perhaps in a conventional environment where you can say, okay, we're open office hours Monday to Friday, somebody may, if you decided we've got a Sunday off, somebody may email us on the morning of that Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly, in fact, if you end up having to take a midweek day off, that often happens.
And they need an urgent response. So you have to know as well when to bend the rules and then how to step away from it again.
Absolutely.
You've got to be able to kind of go, okay, we need to reply to that now. We'll just send them a quick reply and then...
Or when they really don't need a reply and I can absolutely wait until the next day.
Yeah.
So keep a strict calendar, and that actually leads on to the next point, which is no one is setting you deadlines or checking up on your progress. Again, this all amounts to the same thing, and that's planning. So we try to, within our calendar, within our days, we try to give ourselves a timetable. So we will say, for example, when we've got a project that we're making puppets, we're making sets, etc., we actually divide up the calendar days and we'll say, right, well, these 5 days are for making puppets. These next 5 days are for designing the set. These, and we'll try and divide it up properly like that. And then sometimes when we get more deep into it, that might be at the initial stages. And then each week, even then, we might actually divide the days up properly as well and give ourselves almost a school day-like timetable of this is what's happening in the morning, this is what's happening in the afternoon. Yeah. Because I think it really helps to actually have that structure in what otherwise is actually quite a free style life.
I think that's a big part of the problem, is that if it's quite an open-ended job or an open-ended task, as making things or working on anything creative often is, you have to be careful that you don't end with that spilling over. So if we've said we're going to work on this today and we're going to do design in the morning and then we're going to go back to practical making in the afternoon, it really helps, because then you get to 1 o'clock, 1:30, whatever time you're going to stop for the morning, and that's your deadline. That's your deadline to stop. Where when you are designing, when you're doing something like that, you can easily let that roll on into the rest of the day.
And we do now try to be incredibly disciplined about that. We don't let ourselves do that. So if we've said, as you say, design in the morning and making in the afternoon, you have to physically put that stuff away and get on with the next thing in the afternoon.
And discipline is that's a huge part of it.
And it's
difficult. Making a calendar and sticking to it. I think one of the hardest things in the beginning is that you're not as familiar with the processes. No. I think we benefit now from the fact that we've made a lot of shows and we've made a lot of puppets and we've done a lot of these things before, so we have a much better understanding of how long that takes. So I think in the beginning you have to accept that you're going to have to test those boundaries out.
You're going to flounder around a lot.
And it's probably sensible to leave yourself some contingency time as well, which we also try to do.
Definitely.
When you're planning to make a show, we might say, okay, well, there's this long to actually build and design the puppets and make the set. There's this long to rehearse it. But in between that, we'll often have a few days of contingency, just in case one of those things needs a little bit extra.
Yeah. And that's usually the thing. It doesn't tend to take less time. It usually tends to take more. So
sure.
add more than you think. Things always take longer than you think they're going to. I think that's definitely
and stick to your own deadlines.
And stick to your own deadlines. And set goals. That's the other thing about that, where you're kind of trying to check your own progress and you're trying to make sure that you are getting the work done. Set yourself some goals. So it's the same sort of thing, but saying we want to have had at least 3 ideas for the set by the end of this week. Or
we should move on to the next one, I think.
Yes, we should. Well done. We number 3 is space. Yes, no dedicated workspace.
Yeah.
And this is
This is
a really difficult one, actually, I think.
And I think it's one that for a lot of people who start working for themselves, especially in the beginning, as we did, we were in a 1-bedroom flat, and that was where we worked as well as where we lived, and there's not a huge amount of space in there. It's one of the things that can kind of creep under your awareness, because you don't necessarily think of it in the beginning. You do a bit of work on the sofa in the living room. You do a bit of work sitting on your bed. And before you know it, all of those places become workspaces. So you don't really have any clear boundary between when you're working and when you're relaxing. And
we said, in fact, we thought we'd sort of work backwards. So obviously now we have the luxury of our studio space, which is our dedicated workspace for making, for rehearsing. In fact, we now try and do most of our work in this space. We try to come to the studio. That's when work happens. We then have the luxury of then being able to go home, and then that's not work anymore. But prior to that, as you say, we started in a 1-bedroom flat, and what you had just said is exactly what happened to begin with. Mm-hmm. We worked kind of here, there and everywhere within the flat, and quickly realised that wasn't very healthy, because you can't shut the door metaphorically or physically on your job at the end of the day. So what we realised quite quickly was that you needed to have a sort of set of rules for your space. Mm-hmm. So during the working day, when we were making a show in our flat, we had everything out in the living room, all over the floor, all over the table, whatever. But at the end of the day, when we decided, right, it's kind of 6 o'clock or whatever, we tidied everything away. So everything got tidied to a corner of the room. If there were things drying, then they were allowed to sort of be left out on a certain surface. But we tried to clear to the edges. And then the rest then that was it for the day. That was effectively shutting the door on. The work was tidying it away, and then it could be got out again the next day when you start work again. And in the same thing in our bedroom there, we had a corner, didn't we, where there was a desk. Yep. And the admin was done only at that desk in the corner. Yeah. You don't take a laptop or anything, or sit on the bed or anything like that. You only work on that space that is the working area. And again, turn the computer off, push the chair under the desk at the end of the day, and that was the kind of metaphorical sort of door shutting on the day. And I think the important thing to say about that is that if you're really, really pressed for space, it sounds like we're saying, okay, you've got to have a dedicated area. It's not even necessarily about that. No. It's about making a psychological distinction for yourself. So we had conversations with other artists about it, and there were a couple of people we spoke to who said they did something similar, which is something as silly as wearing a hat or putting on a particular pair of shoes. Or there was one guy who had a tie, which was perhaps a hungover from he used to do something else. What they would do was, when they were working, they would put on that hat, and the hat psychologically to them meant, right, I'm now in the workspace. So wherever they were sitting, and they did have, they had a little place they'd go and work on their laptop, but when they were done for the day, they would take off their hat, and then they knew, okay, I'm out of the work area now. But even if you don't have lots of space and you've simply said, right, well, one end of the couch I can work on, and the other end of the couch is not, and I never will work. I'll never sit on that end of the couch to work. Just so that there's always somewhere, and tidy away. Like, I'm a real tidy freak anyway, so that matters to me. But I do think that it's important to tidy the work away, because in that way you can sort of shut the door on it. It's making that distinction and that shift from working to relaxing, and it goes for the other points as well. Yeah, you can't fail to value the time that you spend relaxing either. Sometimes you see the work time as the most important thing, and that the time spent working. Actually, especially if you're creative, because when you're relaxing, that's often when you think of ideas. Yeah. Actually, that leads us into the next point, which is time. Spilled over, perfect. So time, no clear designated working day. I mean, so much of this is about structure in an unstructured, potentially unstructured environment. You need to make yourself a working day, basically. You need to give yourself a timetable. And we try to stick to a sort of strict timetable. Now it's to do with, getting up, doing some exercise, having some breakfast, then we come to work at a certain time. We try and finish at a certain time. It's safe to say when we get close to a deadline on a show, we often end up breaking the rules at the end of the day. But then I think that's fair enough. That happens in all sorts of jobs. Yeah, they describe it as crunch time in a lot of industries, don't they? And that is the truth of it. Something has to be finished, so you have to. And I think the thing about that is that you don't mind it as long as it's only happening then. If it's happening all the time, then you've got something slightly out of balance with your working day. So give yourself a timetable. And the most important thing also within that timetable is giving yourself breaks. If you're in an office environment, or if you're a teacher or anything like that, you usually have designated breaks. If you work for yourself, you have to designate your own breaks, and you should do that. You should have a tea break or a coffee break. You should have at least 20 minutes for lunch, if you can. We used to kind of enforce a certain amount of time for a lunch break by watching an episode of something on Netflix, just so that would mean that we at least had 20 minutes because we'd finished the episode. So if you're bad at scheduling your lunch break, try and find something like that, or a podcast that you like listening to, or something that will enforce your time for your lunch break.
And again, I don't think you can overstate the fact that time off is equally valuable, and you have to appreciate that, because if you don't give yourself any time off, ultimately the work is going to suffer, and you're going to have to work longer to achieve less.
Exactly. So yeah, structured timetable.
I think the one other thing that we've noted, and that's worth mentioning about that, particularly if you're working in something creative, I say that without experience.
I think it's only if you enjoy your job, actually. I think that's the...
Sometimes you will come up with an idea. Sometimes, for example, we might be watching something in the evening, or we'll be listening to the radio or something, and one of us will go, oh, that bit we were thinking of in this show, or this piece that we're working on right now, what about if we tried this, and this? That you need to kind of make an exception for those things, because you need to kind of have the ideas when you have them. I think the difficult part about that is just allowing yourself to express them, briefly discuss them so that you'll both remember them, maybe make a note of them, and then going, okay, we'll talk about that when we get back to work.
I think that's the thing. You have the idea, and we tend to then say, okay, write it down, and we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Don't let it drag you into,
a rabbit hole of...
suddenly going back to work.
Exactly. Then number 5, imposter syndrome.
So I think we should just clarify what we mean by this, because it's a phrase that's thrown about a lot, and I think for me, it's in this context, it's the idea that because we, especially in the beginning of the company, because we had just set up as a company, I'm now having to speak to theatre managers or artistic directors or people who I see as more important than me, and I'm having to speak to them on a kind of equal footing, or to approach them as though, like, well, our company deserves to be in your theatre, or our company deserves to visit this festival. And I think particularly in the beginning, it's difficult to get over that feeling of like, oh, but it's just me. Why should they be speaking to me? Or do I don't really know what I'm doing. So that's what I understand as imposter syndrome. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are other elements to it as well. And I think particularly if perhaps for us, when we started using puppetry, it wasn't that it was something that we'd never done before. We had, but by no means were we experts in that field. And I think that to then describe ourselves as a puppetry company was a bit much for us. And actually at the time we didn't, because of that, because we didn't feel like that was all we did anyway. But I think it's about having the doubts that you're having to kind of present yourself as an expert when you don't feel like one yet. That's how I kind of think of imposter syndrome. And nobody ultimately, because you have given yourself your job, you haven't even had the validation of somebody else saying, we've interviewed you for this job, we think, or auditioned you or whatever, we think that you're perfect for this role or this job. So you have to just self-validate, which is tricky. And I think that the most important thing is that if you believe in your work and believe in what you're doing and approach everything with a sense of humility for a start, then you will be fine, and other people will believe in what you do. Ultimately, if you're enjoying it and you love it and you believe you have a good product, people will see that. If you come out with a piece of work and you apologise for it, then people will feel like you don't believe in yourself and therefore might not get on board with you. So don't apologise, believe in it, and have some humility. Remember that you're going to get a few things wrong, and also not everybody's going to, especially if you're working in a creative industry and making theatre, anything like that, not everyone's going to like it, and that's okay. It doesn't matter that not everybody loves your work. There will be hopefully people who will, and they'll be they'll be the people who'll come back and watch it again and again.
The crucial thing, I think, in that is make something that you love and believe in it.
Exactly. And do your best. That's the other thing. If you're trying your hardest and doing your best, then nobody can really criticize you for that. So finally, self-promotion and selling yourself. I mean, it's tantamount to the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think you could probably do a whole vlog on that in itself. It is something that we still struggle with. I think it's much easier for most people. It's much easier to sell someone else or something else than it is to go out there and sort of sell yourself. So I think it's definitely something that we've had to learn about and practice as we've gone along. And by no means are we experts in it now, but certainly a lot better than we used to be.
It's quite easy to undervalue your work, as your own work as well, and certainly financially that becomes quite tricky when you're trying to figure out what to charge for a show, or charge for tickets to your show, or any of those sorts of things. I would say speak to other companies if you can.
Yeah.
You know, if that's where you're at with it, find other companies on Instagram. We often have chats with other companies on Instagram. Is usually where people ask us about it, and we're always happy to share any of that, because when we started it was really difficult. It's really difficult to know where to put yourself.
Yeah, I mean, actually people are generally really friendly if you approach them and ask them for advice, and the worst they can say is no. And certainly if anybody ever asks us, you know, if anybody ever has any questions about anything like that, we try and help them the best way, the best that we can.
So
the crucial lesson for me was there's a particular idea that I had in my mind in the beginning, and it made things very difficult for me. I always felt like when I was doing anything like that where I had to self-promote, whether it's because you're talking to a venue, whether it's because you're talking to a potential funder, I always felt like I was in the position of asking for something, and I was kind of the one going, oh please, can you, well, it would be great if you could help us. And while that's true to a certain extent, I think you have to reframe it in your mind and value what you do and what you bring to the table. So you have to see it more as an equal transaction. When you're talking to those people, what you're saying to them is, okay, what do you have to offer? And here's what I can give you in return. You have this great space, this lovely venue. Well, I've got this great show that would work brilliantly in there. So how about we come to an agreement about that? If you're talking to a funder, well, you have this money that could support this project. I've got this great idea for a project that would be perfect for it. So what can we do to make that work? And I think that shift made all the difference for me, and it made it so much easier for me to talk to people about our work and to promote ourselves and what we do.
So I think we were briefly going to talk about working as a couple. I mean, again, we could do a whole vlog probably on working as a couple. I think for us, we always say it helped that we we met working together anyway. So we already sort of had a kind of working relationship, and then we started to work together. We have worked hard on how we work together, and certainly it's mostly about communicating. We realised that, you know, the worst times we've ever had really working together is when one of us has been cross about something and not communicated it to the other one and not explained why. And then once you actually realise that you just need to say, then actually everybody is fine, because in fact often both of you are thinking the same thing, or you're on different. Communication basically is one of the main things. And then the other thing is all of this stuff that we've been talking about being your own boss. It all applies, I think, doubly when you're working as a couple together, in the sense that because you're not then leaving your work colleagues to then go home to your partner at the end of the day. Your work colleague is your partner. Together you have to decide this is the end of the day. Together you have to keep the kind of the agreement that you're not going to bring too much work into your personal life and your relaxation time.
I think for me, if you're working with your partner or frankly anybody that you've got a close personal relationship with, it kind of comes down to 2 or 3 things depending on how you break them up. But the first one is to respect the abilities of the other person and know where they're stronger than you. So, there are things without question that I will defer to Antonia.
And absolutely vice versa. And we've learned more and more that over the time.
Yeah. And, understand that, learn where your strengths are, learn where your partner's strengths are, and make sure that you're both kind of playing to them and using them to the best effort. Kind of comes into that, but then have some humility. And understanding that is part of that humility, but also being able to admit when you're wrong, being able to admit when you were grumpy, being able to admit when you were fed up about something, and saying it, putting it out there and clearing the air, because you're not going to get anything else done useful until you do that. And then finally, I think it's understanding, much as lots of other points here, the difference between work and personal. Yeah. If you have a disagreement about something that's to do with work, remember that is business, not personal. And the two things are completely separate. And
also, I think, give yourself a break when you know that you are always going to talk to your partner in a certain way because they are your partner. So when you're working together, you're always going to have a slightly shorthand way, and consequently potentially speak in a slightly more short way to them.
Sure.
And that's fine, and it's okay, and neither of you,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
and let it go. Don't hold on to it.
No.
Don't clear the air and let it go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very joyful thing to work with we consider ourselves to be, well, at least I do, very lucky to work together, and we enjoy working together. And I think that's the most important thing. If you're not enjoying working together, probably don't do it. If you enjoy working together, then do it.
I think we should probably draw a big line under that and stop there. No idea how long that was. Hopefully not too much, but we'll break it up into chapters as usual down in the description. So if there's something in particular that you're interested in, you'll be able to go straight to that. And like we said, we'll be back to making and stuff next week. So next week's vlog should, I imagine, be focused on the stuff that we're making for Hansel and Gretel. In the meantime, if you've got any questions or anything that came up because of that, please let us know in the comments and we'll do our best to answer them. Otherwise, give us a thumbs up, possibly even subscribe to the channel, that would be great. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.